Celebrating diversity, this is Bristol's BCFM 93.2.
And now to our exclusive tonight, an investigation, dirty deals done by the US and British governments at the end of World War II. With the Nazis, they were still supposed to be fighting. Did James Bond author Ian Fleming, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his mysterious assistant, Desmond Morton, who lived just down the road from him, Lord Louis Mountbatten, even King George VI, all do deals for the Nazis' looted billions. Well, this week, Jill Goulding never knew what her grandfather Harold did in World War II until she opened an attaché case in her loft and found scores of secret documents which prove Harold was one of the greatest heroes of World War II. So why, despite his being a commanding officer of the Special Boat Service and awarded a DSO medal, do veterans groups refuse to recognise him? And why did he die just months after the end of the war? He was involved at the very top secret levels of the Special Boat Service and commando raids into Nazi-occupied Europe. I spoke to Jill earlier this week.
My name is Jill Goulding and I live on Hayling Island. Back in 2010, I found my grandfather's briefcase in my mother's loft. I found out that he was working in very secret missions and I started to do research.
OK, so was this something that your grandmother hadn't known about, or your parents? Because this has skipped a generation, didn't it?
That's right, it skipped a generation. My father didn't know anything about his father's role in World War II, other than he had received a DSO in March 1941. He did try to find out what his father had done through the war, but always came up with blanks, other than one letter from Major General Laycock in 1946 stating that he'd done more missions on enemy coasts than any other officer of any service.
Well, if he's got a DSO, surely he's going to be quite famous, isn't he?
Well, you would have thought so, but no. When I started to do the research, I did actually find some pictures of him on the internet under the Commando Veterans website of him training SBS and SSRF. SBS is the Special Boat Service and SSRF is the Small Scale Raiding Force.
OK, so they're kind of commandos, aren't they? They were going in, doing raids, actually some of them down rivers in occupied Europe into Nazi territory. What sort of stuff have you found out that he was up to?
In 1940 to at least 42, he was landing agents and very important people into occupied Europe and bringing people out, of course, some very important people as well. In 1943, we know he became the commander of SBU, which is the Special Boat Unit. Under the Special Boat Unit, there was the Royal Marines Boom Patrol Department, the Royal Naval Boom Department, the Sea Reconnaissance Unit, Sonic Warfare, 30 Assault Unit, the Royal Marines Boom Patrol, that was the cockle shell heroes known as Operation Frankton.
So what do you put the lack of your father knowing anything about this? What was it all down to? Because I know that Harold, your grandfather, died actually very quickly after the war, didn't he?
He did. He died a few weeks after the war in 1945. We really don't know. My father thought he worked within the Special Boat Service and COPP, from what he can recall that his father had said. But other than that, he couldn't find out any information. Every time he approached anyone, it was just, no, sorry, we can't tell you.
Well, tell us a bit about COPP, because that was an interesting unit that was training during the war, actually very close to where you live now.
Yes, that's right, and close to where my grandfather lived as well. COPP is Combined Operations Pilotage Parties. They were trained on Hayling Island, initially at HMS Northney 1. Hayling Island is between Portsmouth and Chichester. It's a little island, 5 miles by 4. Hayling Island Sailing Club became COPP's main training centre, and they incidentally put a memorial up to COPP last year. Unfortunately, my grandfather still hasn't been recognised as being their overall commanding officer in charge of their training and deployment. With the COPP organisers, at first, when they started raising money for the COPP Memorial, they approached me and asked me to put a collage together about my grandfather's work, which I did, and that was displayed in the Hayling Island Theatre, which was to raise money, and obviously as a family we donated and supported them. After the event, I approached the organisers and asked them if they would be good enough to take this opportunity to highlight my grandfather's role within COPP. And I showed them all the necessary documents of proof, but they decided to ignore the fact, gloss over it, and he still has not been recognised.
So what do you put that down to? That's a very strange reaction. You would have thought that any organisation like that, particularly someone who's had military honours, that they would actually be quite helpful. I mean, you'd hope that anyway.
You would have hoped that, and I was very surprised considering that the main organiser has since written a book called An Island at War about Hayling Island. He is a historian. The book is all about Hayling in the Second World War, with many photographs, all about COPP, the men and women on Hayling. Considering my grandfather was the commanding officer of HMS Northney 1, 2, 3 and 4, and commanding officer of COPP, and had a DSO, and it was known he led the flotilla into Dieppe.
Because Dieppe, for people that don't know, was a disaster, basically. It was before D-Day, a load of Canadian troops, plus some British, did a raid on the occupied French coast, and it was a disaster. Many people were killed.
Hundreds of Canadians were killed, massacred. It was a terrible time for the Canadians, yes. So I would have thought the organiser and author, Robin Walton, would have been only too happy to have included Harold within his book. He's even on a map which was given to Lord Mountbatten in 1943, where it clearly states Lieutenant Commander Goulding lives here, Moss Rose Cottage.
So what do you put it down to?
I don't know whether Robin has decided he just doesn't want to include my grandfather, or if there's an ulterior reason.
Maybe sort of professional pride that I'm a historian and I know it all kind of thing. You just don't know. But anyway, tell us a little bit about those that you've met who knew your grandfather, because obviously that's one of the things which has been quite helpful since 2010 when you discovered this attaché case in your loft, to actually have some of the honour that he performed during the war corroborated by people that knew him.
I managed to get hold of John Ainsworth-Davis, who telephoned me after I'd spoken to his publisher and told me quite a bit on the phone that he knew my grandfather very well. He described him to me, and the fact that he had actually trained Jad, as we affectionately call him. So I spoke to Jad quite a few times, and then I had the great honour of meeting him at the Newtown House Hotel on Hayling Island. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk to him for very long because I was evicted by Robin Walton for showing the COPs and COPpists' families the SBU book, which was signed by the COPs and COPpists.
Hang on, there was a reunion of the COP people, but you were evicted. Explain that, please.
It was actually an open day. It was open to the public.
And you're a member of the public, aren't you?
Correct. Or I thought I was. They had a big display open to the public, and then there was a reception area for the COPpists and their families. I went in there with Jad, and I was showing some of the other families their father's signatures within the book, and I was just approached and told that if I didn't leave I would be evicted. Bearing in mind the last thing I wanted to do was upset these wonderful heroes or their families.
But what was Jad's reaction to that?
Well, I apologised to Jad and said I was very sorry, but I would have to leave. He said he was very embarrassed that Harold was being treated the way he was and that he should be recognised, and that really he thought people just didn't want me talking about Harold. He did tell me that they'd done some very secret things towards the end of the war together.
Your grandfather died quite quickly after the war. What happened there? Because I know his gravestone doesn't even have his surname next to his name or his honour, does it?
That's correct. It doesn't say his surname or his DSO or the fact that he even had a son. It just says Harry, dearly beloved wife of Edna Goulding, died the 4th of August 1945.
Amazing. And what was Jad's reaction, John Ainsworth-Davis' reaction? I'm not sure whether he knew or not that Harold had died so quickly, the guy that had trained him in this commando unit so quickly after the war.
Jad did ask me about Harold. I told him that he had died in 1945, a few weeks after the war. Jad was rather surprised, but he did say to me that he was rather glad that Harold had died so early, which was a bit of a shock to me, really.
It's a very strange thing to say.
Very strange. But that they had done secret things together, and Harold, Jad respected so much and said that he was a true gentleman and that he just wouldn't have liked to have been lied to, and Jad felt they had been lied to.
Did he explain how or why?
No, that was it.
What are you doing at the moment in order to try and make sure your grandfather is recognised for his work?
I contacted Lawrence de Mello, an investigative journalist, and Dan Snow. In fact, I sent them both an email on the same day to ask if they would help me get Harold's story out there. Dan Snow, although he was quite involved with the COPP event as main speaker, I believe, he didn't answer me at all. Lawrence replied the next day. Lawrence and I got chatting, and with her being a confidant of John Ainsworth-Davis, and then with Harold being my grandfather, we clicked immediately. We decided we would write a book together. We've got a lot of top secret, most secret documents. We have the original transcript from the hearing on board Queen Emma the day after Dieppe, which is when Grandpa was being interviewed, basically.
About what happened at Dieppe? Because there's been a whole load of fallout about that over the years, hasn't there?
There has. There's been a lot of books written about Dieppe. I don't believe the truth is yet out there. I'm sure the Germans knew they were coming. Jad informed me that he was there on the hilltop being made to watch after being caught and interrogated. I'm sure that the Germans definitely knew that the Canadians were going into Blue Beach. And unfortunately, Harold had to land them. That was his orders. His signals to the main ship were ignored. He did at least have the opportunity to go in and try and rescue people, but he couldn't get near enough to the shore. There were 2 boats that went in. They couldn't get near enough to the shore to rescue anyone.
It's a long time ago, isn't it? Maybe it's gone past the time. History's already been written.
Yes, I believe history has been written incorrectly. I would like to see the truth on some of the matters come out. I'd like the people that have written these books about Dieppe to realise that they have some information, not all the information, and they shouldn't write books about things without full knowledge.
But you've been told, basically, by some of the officials involved in the COPP organisation, for example, to just get out of the way and forget about it.
Correct. Yes, to basically go away, be quiet.
So are you going to do that?
No. I'm absolutely not going to do that. I'm going to have his gravestone rectified. I was lucky enough to meet the Pipers, Mr. Piper Senior and Junior just a month ago. They were the people that very kindly donated the huge granite stone to the COPP Memorial. When I told them about Harold's story, they said that they would be more than happy to help me, and they are going to make up a stone inlay for me for Harold's grave, so that the main headstone will not be changed, but there will be an insert to actually honour his name.
Jill, if listeners are interested in following up more about this, how can they reach you and how can they read more about your grandfather?
Probably the best way would be via yourself, Tony, and if you would be good enough to pass on any information, inquiries, help, and if there's a good publisher out there looking for a good book, contact us.
OK. I'll be more than happy to do that, Jill. Thanks very much for coming in today.
Tony, thank you very much for airing this interview. I much appreciate it, not just for me, but mainly for my grandmother, who had to keep quiet all her life. She died at the age of 99, and she was actually 86 years old before she was even classed as a war widow. Mainly, more than anything else, for my grandfather Harold and his memory.
That was Jill Goulding there talking to me earlier on this week. Martin, this is pretty significant. It certainly corroborates what we've heard about John Ainsworth-Davis from him, and for dirty deals being done at the end of the war, and this suddenly having to be then covered up.
Yes, I think John Ainsworth-Davis wrote a book called Operation JB, Operation James Bond, because James Bond was the name of the operation, to extract Martin Bormann from Germany and make sure he had a safe future in Argentina. That's the real meat of this story.
The other thing is, of course, that following on from that, there's this interesting book by Paul Manning, which came out in the early 1980s.
Martin Bormann, Nazi in exile.
Yeah, so there's a kind of underground Fourth Reich, at least, and it seemed to be being aided right from the very beginning by some top people here in the UK. Anyway, we'll see how that transpires. So it's time to sign off now for the Murdoch News at 7, followed by Mohammed's Arabian Nights, our sister show Dialects, on Monday at 11 a.m, where we discuss the merchant ventures controlling Bristol schools and find out how the EU, which controls 500 million of us now, really works. Thanks to our guest in the first hour, Fabian Breckles, Labour councillor, and also to Ian Fraser. I'm Tony Gosling, on Twitter at Tony Gosling, and thisweek.org.uk is this show. See you next week, and don't let the banksters get you down.
On the hour, live from the Sky News Centre.
From the Sky News Centre at 7, police have stepped up protection for Jewish communities and for police officers following last week's attacks in Paris. The changes will include more patrols near synagogues and Jewish schools. David Cameron's welcomed the announcement.
This is based on what has happened in France, on the whole picture that we see, and it is sensible,